Hey, and welcome to the Lyle Shelton Show. It's wonderful to have your company. I'm coming to you from the brand new studio, made available to good source contributors like myself, thanks to the generosity of supporters like you, and of course, the good source editor, Dave Pellet. Well, on today's show, I'm going to rake over the coals of the US election. This is ongoing. I think all of us are a little weary of it, but it's too important to ignore. And we're going to have a look at some of the issues around voter fraud. I'm going to be bringing into the discussion a little later on in the program my good friend Dave Pellet, who's going to help me dissect this. We're also going to look at the latest example of gender fluid LGBT madness, indoctrination of children in New South Wales schools exposed by the indomitable Mark Latham. And I'm going to show you a clip from a very creative pro-life group. It's probably not a new clip to some of you. It was new to me, but I thought it was worth having a look at. So all that and more today on the Lyle Shelton Show. Thanks for your company. I thought Donald Trump would win. It appears I was wrong. Maybe I'm conceding too much. But his presidency will be over unless he can prove in court that there was enough voter fraud to skew the result. I'm convinced there are questions that need to be answered. I'm not convinced the answers will provide evidence that would convince even Trump's appointments to the US Supreme Court to overturn the result. That's a big call. But the next few weeks will tell. And despite what his haters say, Trump is entitled to seek adjudication in the courts. I, for one, want to know how many Biden mail-in votes turned up after Election Day with no postmark on to prove that they were cast before November 3. I find it unfathomable that US courts allow mail-in votes to be counted even when there is no postmark to prove they were cast before the polls closed. Another example for the Only in America file, I think. Why did dumps of hundreds of thousands of ballots, almost all for Biden, suddenly materialise in key states when Trump was leading on election night? Why were Trump scrutineers denied access? Can you imagine that happening in Australia? Election night trends, once established after a critical mass of votes have been counted, are rarely so dramatically reversed. Even the anti-Trump pundits could see it. The CNN election coverage took as sombre a tone as that of Australia's ABC election night coverage when it became apparent that Scott Morrison, not Bill Shorten, would win. If the worm turned legitimately, I look forward to the media commentary explaining this extraordinary phenomenon. I get that the majority of mail-in ballots favoured Biden, but when 130,000 ballots dump at 4:30 in the morning and there are just 3,000 votes for Trump, something seems very strange. Has there ever been an election outside of Zimbabwe where something like that has happened? Maybe I've been listening to Steve Bannon and his War Room Pandemic too much, but I'm keen to see if Trump's concerns can stand up to the test of the courts or if they can be legitimately explained away. And if all these and more anomalies can be reconciled, well, fine. Those of us who favour a Trump-Pence White House should fold our tents. And so should Trump, with grace. Now, I'm not holding my breath that will happen, but let's wait and see how the next few weeks play out. What is far more alarming than the fake fear that was whipped up about the supposed Russian interference in the 2016 election is the actual interference by our big brother tech tyrants in Silicon Valley. Billions of us around the world signed up to Twitter, Facebook and Google believing they were ushering in a new era of freedom of speech. Their malicious intent as the arbiters of truth is now unmasked. They have censored or dropped in caveats on tweets and Facebook posts from the White House to my house when the approved line is not towed. Missing context. The same information was checked in another post by independent fact checkers, end quote. Facebook wrote on my page. Big Brother is watching and will correct your posts. We all need to move to parlay fast. If Trump loses, it appears voters have rejected his bombastic style, but not his agenda. Greg Sheridan's insightful points in the Weekend Australian, where he says this: As one wag put it, the election was a contest between those who disliked or hated Trump's personality as opposed to those who disliked or hated the Democrat swing to the left. Democrats talking of socialism, defunding the police and ending fossil fuels is enough to make the voters wary. Commentators routinely decry gridlock, but Americans vote for gridlock quite deliberately. End quote. The blue wave predicted by the mainstream media and the pollsters didn't materialise. How these people can get it so badly wrong 2 elections in a row is mind-boggling. They are the purveyors of propaganda, seemingly aiming to influence the election, not provide informed commentary or accurate data. Instead, a red wave locked in Republican control of the Senate and swept Republicans into 27 of the 50 governor's mansions in the corresponding state elections. Biden and his radical left running mate Kamala Harris will surely be stymied in implementing their agenda. That's a relief. Trump threw a rock in the Washington Ponds establishment. He emboldened deplorables the world over, providing hope to those who don't want to be ruled by the woke PC overlords, who are hysterical about the climate and assert that white people have racism in their hearts because they are white. The stakes were higher than ever at this election, and voters knew it. With 72 million votes cast so far, Joe Biden won the majority of votes and won more than any other presidential contender in the history of the US. But so too did Donald Trump, even though he lags behind Biden by a few million votes. Both men are more popular than Barack Obama. It was an extraordinary turnout. Trump's movement hasn't gone away. It is half the country and it is strong enough to withstand the loss of the White House, but take fire insurance on the Senate and the state houses. These people, chumps as Biden sneeringly calls them, have not drunk the elite's Kool-Aid. Win or lose the White House, Trump's conservative revolution is here to stay. Well, welcome back to the Lyle Shelton Show. As you can see, I'm joined by a special guest, my good friend Dave Pello, the editor of the Good Source News. Dave, welcome to the Lyle Shelton Show.
Thank you, sir. Very good to be here.
It's great to have you. It's great to be able to just kick around the events of the last week or so with someone like yourself, and we had that groundbreaking live coverage of the election last week, that marathon 4 hours. I think we sat at this desk.
Yeah, a bit more.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And we called the election quite early in the piece. George Christensen called it for Donald Trump. We were all looking at the trends, and based on any other normal election coverage, you'd think with the percentage of votes counted, the trends towards Donald Trump, it was lay down Mazet that he would win. It was quite logical that we would call it.
Yeah, look, I think it's too early to say we were wrong. I think those are very solid predictions, and I think, the very disappointing fact is that now the mainstream media seems to have reached the consensus that that they can announce who the president is, like it's their authority, and clearly the Trump campaign and lots of conservative commentators echoing this fundamental truth, which unfortunately from the highest office in the land and down, there's a lot of people who don't understand. The media don't decide the final outcome.
And that's a really important point, because it's Wednesday today. On Sunday it was CNN and the other media that they decided that Joe Biden had enough electoral college votes. So they made the call. This result has not been certified by whatever the certifying body. It's not, they don't have an electoral commission like we do, but the electoral college will meet once all the states have tallied all the votes. But the voting isn't completely finished counting either.
No.
But Dave, I just wanted to... There's a lot of people who are saying, credible people, who are saying that things don't add up here. It's not just the Trump camp. I was interested at the weekend, John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, he posted an interview that he did on his Conversations website with a man by the name of Victor David Hanson, who wrote The Case for Trump. And he says that if all of the votes had been cast according to the laws set down by the individual states, Donald Trump would have won the election by a long way. Now, this is on John Anderson's platform, so this is not some conspiracy theory. This is credible people discussing, what they see as anomalies in this process.
There are countless anomalies, and even just to recall them off the top of our head would make a convincing case. And yet, if you I haven't spent the time to research and create an exhaustive list, but I think there's very high confidence that the Pennsylvania decision will go to the Supreme Court of the United States, and there it will be set aside, and a recount of only legally cast ballots on time will be counted next time around. Now, Pennsylvania has 20 seats. 20 votes for the Electoral College, and that obliterates Joe Biden's lead. Now that is one very likely to happen outcome. So if that was the only thing going on at the moment, it says that the way the Pennsylvania votes were counted is probably illegitimate and irregular. And the main thing to point out there, it's not necessarily election rigging, but I think it's the Pennsylvania judiciary and the governor made between them, I think it was the state Supreme Court and the governor made some executive order held up, which isn't their power to do. Well, and it's not their authority.
And this is the point that Victor David Hanson was making with John Anderson. He said that there were lots of decisions made in contravention to what the lawmakers in those states. So the state legislatures set the laws, the rules by which the election should be conducted.
That's right.
And there were numerous changes made by election officials, boards that have some sort of jurisprudence over the running of the elections, but in contravention to what the politicians had decided when they set the ground rules.
That's right.
And he makes the point that...
It's legislators that make legislation.
That's right.
Not courts and not the governor. It's not part of the
governor's...
And not
bureaucrats running... Well, that's right. Governors were one. Some of the governors made... State governors, equivalent to our premiers, made executive decisions. And some of the bureaucrats. Victor...
and of course, they were all Democrat governors that were accused of changing the system.
They were on the main. Georgia is the only Republican-run state where there's contention, but the rest of those swing battle states...
Did they change some rules, electoral rules?
I'm not sure if they changed rules, but there's certainly controversy over the running. And I can't give you the specifics in Georgia, but the vote was tight there, and it seems like there's been ballot dumps there, as there have been in Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, the ballot dumps need to be investigated, but
absolutely.
You go to Nevada and you've got thousands of Californians who have registered property there because that helps them claim Nevada state taxes, which are significantly lower than the oppressive taxes of Democrat-ruled California. And so they can vote twice from their Nevada address and their California address.
That's got to be checked. Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, is saying that he's got numerous affidavits from poll watchers, what they call poll watchers, which we would call scrutineers, who were denied access to even watch the opening of these mail-in ballots.
And that's got to be the most glaring thing. If you're an honest lefty liberal, if you're intellectually honest, and you're looking at this and going, show me the corruption, show me the irregularity, show me the rigging, well, now here's where it starts looking a lot like rigging, where there's a lot of smoke that demands investigation, and that is the secrecy over how the votes were counted. Why would you not let both sides equally scrutinise? Now, this is a basic precept of Australian democracy.
That question has to be answered. It would be unthinkable in an Australian election for scrutineers to be told, sorry, you can't watch a postal ballot being opened up and whether the signature checks and corresponds.
Absolutely. Whether the rules are being followed.
Hundreds of thousands of votes got through the system. We know that voting stopped in the middle of the night. We know that big tranches of ballots were dumped in at 4:30 in the morning in some states. Multiple examples of this. Where you had statistically impossible results occurring, 130,000 ballots for Biden, maybe 3,000 for Trump. Just unheard of statistical examples of things.
This is why people should be watching your show. Is because it's because there's no accurate term that is softer than lying harlots, which is now the mainstream media. For them to take all of this information and dismiss it out of hand and declare Joe Biden the winner arbitrarily, as if Channel 9 gets to decide the results of Friday night football without any reference to the referee.
You would think the media would want to understand and know why the scrutineers were disbarred.
Well,
and explain these ballot dumps and the other anomalies, the Californians voting in Nevada.
Well, see, the other thing we've got to be looking at now is not only what's the outcome of the court battle, what's the outcome of the recounts and the various contests. And there's going to be litigation, which there will be lawsuits, which will lead to discovery phases where evidence will be required from both sides. And what do we have to fear from truth? I think one of the big investigations that now has to happen, starting with the polling and the pre-election coverage, is now punters, voters, media consumers now need to look at the mainstream media, from the ABC through to the corporate free market media, and even through to the Prime Minister, and say, why are you lying to us? What is in it for you that you would so readily rush to a prejudicial judgment in favour of Joe Biden? Why are you so desperate to cover up and sweep aside all of this evidence, all of this, in what world would you be so ignorant if the shoe was on the other foot?
Exactly right. I mean, the incuriousness, if that's a word, of the media to want to even investigate this. It has alarmed me. I mean, you use some strong language about the mainstream media.
I feel like there's
I think they have
malicious intent there.
Well, there's certainly something very wrong.
And I'm speaking corporately. There's obviously good players in the media.
When you see headlines of the Trump campaign's baseless allegations of voter irregularities. Well, I think the things you and I have just discussed now are not baseless.
I heard the media say over and over again that Trump had no legal victories, when I knew of three. I knew of three court decisions that had gone the way the Trump campaign wanted to, while media commentators were still saying he's had no success, he's got no luck, he's got no chance, he's getting told no and getting rejected over and over again. I'm like, how are you lying so brazenly? This is appalling to the level of which I'm now no longer a media critic or even skeptic. I've given up hope. They're irredeemable and totally prostituted themselves for a horrific. They're meant to be a vital part of.
They should at least have some business They shouldn't just be dismissing it. They should be investigating this, and they should be at least saying, well, look, let's wait and see the outcome. But it's almost like the media have performed a coronation of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on Sunday, again without the results being declared, with all these anomalies going on. You'd think they would want to know if the sort of things we're discussing, the sort of things you'd expect in Zimbabwe, as I said in the editorial at the top of the show.
Look, we have to hold them to a higher standard than we would an entertainment company. Yeah. Like if you don't like some movie that's just not to your show because it's got too much social activism, fine, change the channel. But the media are an essential part. A free and independent media are an essential part to holding power to account, to giving voters information upon which they make informed decisions to change government.
It's almost like they weren't interested in doing that. I mean, for the whole 4 years of the Trump administration, there's just been nothing but animus from the mainstream media. In the lead up to this election, as we saw in 2016, you had a combination of big tech, which we're now calling the tech tyrants of Silicon Valley. I think it's an apt term to describe Google and Facebook for the sort of censorship and things that they're doing.
Agree.
You had big media, which we've just discussed, and you had big pollsters all predicting that Trump was going to lose in a landslide, in a blue wave to Joe Biden. Now that hasn't happened. This has been a very, very close election.
Quite the
polls
opposite
were completely wrong.
Quite the opposite has happened.
Exactly. And yet no one is held accountable for getting this so badly wrong 2 elections in a row.
I actually, again, another indication that the media has an agenda, and it's a political, social agenda. It is not an honesty, integrity, or journalism agenda. It's a political, social activism agenda. What they have failed to observe, honestly, with any degree of honesty at all, is that Democrats have totally lost this election. They may, once everything, there's a slim chance, there's a sliver of hope that if all of the legal avenues fail and reveal nothing, that Joe Biden is president. But at what cost? Their agenda and their rhetoric and their narrative has been completely... For 4 years, the media have campaigned against Trump's personality, Trump's policies, and Trump's supporters. They've campaigned against all of them.
Well, remember 4 years ago, they weren't accepting the outcome of the election. They said this was a Russia... inside a job where Russia had interfered with the election. That turned out to be a complete hoax. Not a skerrick of evidence turned out against that.
Yep.
And yet now they are all down on Donald Trump, saying he's got to accept the result and should concede. There's far more basis for him to hold out.
And now they say election interference isn't possible.
Exactly.
You get people calling Joe Hockey irresponsible because he suggests, of course, there's some degree of voter fraud. Mind you, if he had said that about the 2016 election, they would have been singing his praises.
It's demonisation, and it's here in Australia. I mean, our good friend George Christensen today, and Craig Kelly, the Liberal MP for Hughes down there in Sydney, both of them, because they are raising the similar sort of things that you and I are discussing here tonight, they are being ridiculed by the Australian Financial Review as if there's some sort of conspiracy theorists and out of step with Scott Morrison and the government. They've been demonised for having legitimate scepticism.
Here's the thing I like about Craig Kelly and George Christensen, and the thing I don't like about Scott Morrison and other, I think it's probably appropriate to call them wet liberals, is they think they need to appease and earn the favour of the mainstream media. Like, who cares what the Australian Financial Review says? Who cares what Guardian or the ABC say? They are never going to vote for us. They're never going to vote for a conservative social platform. They're never going to vote for conservative values. They are far, far, far left and getting further there. In Trump's favour, the thing he has really done by, as you said, throwing that rock in the pond of the establishment, is he has basically laughed at the media and says, do what you like. Do what you like. I don't need you. I'll talk directly to the people, your history. If you do your job properly, fantastic. If you don't, you're fake news and dismissible.
Now, Dave, I want to move on to Joe Biden's speech. It was preemptive and presumptuous, I think, because there's still a process to run out. You mentioned the Democrats' agenda, but there were several things that struck me in his speech, and Kamala Harris in her introductory remarks. They both went straight to hard left issues of identity politics. So they mentioned, Biden directly mentioned transgender. Now that's code for, we are going to teach your children that their gender is fluid. He mentioned gays, so we're into identity politics. He mentioned they both mentioned climate change. Now, Kamala Harris is a proponent of this economy and jobs destroying Green New Deal.
They both are. It's on Biden's website, although he denied it.
And Biden's admitted during the debate, under pressure from Donald Trump, that he was going to ban fracking, shut down the fossil fuel industry.
Correct.
They're going for zero net emissions by 2050. And already the pressure is piling on Scott Morrison this week in the Parliament to go down a similar path, even though Australia has already hurt itself massively economically by trying to reduce emissions. And the third thing they talked about was this issue of systemic racism, this idea that you and I, because we're white, we must have racism in our heart. Now, I abhor racism, and if it exists and where it exists, and I'm not saying that there are not examples of where it happens.
It exists where imperfect people exist.
It should be called out, it should not be tolerated. But this idea that just because of the colour of our skin, that somehow they can see into our hearts and we have racism whether we know it or like it or not. So they've gone straight to these hard left, controversial things right at the outset and set a tone for whatever administration they hope to have.
Joe Biden used the word mandate and claimed a mandate in his speech. And he might as well have said Martians come from chicken eggs with elephant parents. Like, it's just complete nonsense. There is not a single minority in America, not one single minority demographic in America that the Democrats didn't lose ground in. That Trump And
this man
everything
is supposed to be a racist. Got more black votes. Than
every single demographic, every single minority demographic, Trump made
Latinos,
significant gains in.
yeah.
The only demographic, it's been widely reported, it won't be the first time you've heard it here, but the only demographic that Trump didn't do well in, the only demographic that didn't give Trump a mandate and Trump's policies an endorsement, and the 4-year campaign against them a complete repudiation, was white males with higher education. It's like everybody's got better prosperity, better freedom, better liberty and peace under the Trump policies. These policies from Biden and Kamala Harris, completely rejected by Americans. Now, the media like to lie about how divided America is, but that is in contrast to the homogeneity they expect, the conformity of thought they expect from 350 million people.
Yeah.
That's not divided, that's a population.
Half of the country voted for Trump knowing exactly what his policies were, that he is a repudiation of that woke agenda that I just described coming from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on Sunday. I think a massive proportion of the votes for the Democrats weren't an endorsement of their woke agenda. There perhaps might have been some concern about Trump's personality and his bombacity and the narcissism and that sort of thing. But I don't believe that Democrat vote reflected people who wanted their sons to be put in a dress at school, or that they want their economy destroyed in the name of some sort of virtue signalling, and that they were happy to pay the very, very high costs of reducing emissions to net zero by 2050. So I think that's an ill-informed vote. But and the point of all that is that we still have an America that is rejected the woke agenda that the Democrats have embraced in a very radical way, that's embodied by Kamala Harris.
Despite the media's best efforts, despite the lying media's best efforts, they have failed to sell the division that they sought to sow.
Exactly.
Now, if there had have been an overwhelming blue wave, as predicted, that would have looked like a divided America.
Yeah.
That would have looked like a population determined to separate people based on immutable identity traits and fantasy theories about gender. But no, what America said was we're a nation of individuals. We're a nation of individuals who reject identity politics, who reject critical race theory, who reject the narrative that Donald Trump is a orange man, very bad orange man. It's like the media was completely lost on this, and the ignorant vote, those people who voted for the Democrats anyway, if the media is their main source of information, small wonder.
Yeah. Well, look, it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. I guess the saving grace of this election was that it appears the Republicans have retained control of the Senate. So a lot of the things that we are just discussing are going to be very difficult for a Biden administration to get through the Congress. Now, it won't mean they won't virtue signal.
It is a good thing.
It won't mean that he can't perform some executive orders, that Kamala Harris can't give us PC lectures all the time, and I'm sure she will. But to get substantive change on a lot of these issues is going to be difficult because of the control of the Senate. And as I said in my editorial at the start, the state houses, 27 of the 50 states returned Republican governors. You can't say there is an endorsement of a radical left
and the
agenda.
huge gains the Republicans made in Congress.
Well, that's right. They had a net gain of
House?
Seats in the House.
Oh, huge! I think it's
like 6 or something.
At least that's conservative.
Yeah.
It's like at best they've got 2 years. The Democrats, if Biden is elected
until the midterms. Yeah.
Now, something important to remember about this is in 2000, 20 years ago, there was a contest between presidential candidates Bush and Gore. And that took no less than 30 days to get through its legal processes.
I remember it well.
There is no reason to be rushing to call anybody president just yet.
Well, look, in fairness, though, I think George W. Bush did declare victory, and he did set up a transition team.
It's totally okay for the candidates to do that. That's normal. I'd expect Trump to do it. I'd expect Biden to do it. What I expect is for the Prime Minister of the nation,
I think
for thinking people, and for the media to go, hang on, we've been here before.
Yeah, and as you mentioned that, I could be wrong here, it was a few years ago now, but I don't recall the media in America having a coronation in effect for George W. Bush while that legal process was drawn out. In fact, if I remember rightly, they actually sneered at him for setting up the transition team. I remember he got Colin Powell and other key staff together, and they started working on their administration. So very different treatment to what Donald Trump is getting. Dave, I think we should draw a line under the discussion there.
Sure.
We've been going for a while, but look, I wanted to raise just a couple other things in the time we've got left. This article really caught my attention today, and it's, again, Mark Latham. What a champion that man is in the New South Wales Parliament, the One Nation leader down there. Now, the Telegraph is reporting some great work that he's unearthed as a result of parents coming to him about, again, more of this radical LGBTIQA plus gender fluid theory being thrust down the throats of young children, students, Year 8 kids at high school. And Dave, this is shocking. This LGBT questionnaire, which Latham has uncovered as a result of parents from Kirrawee High School. This is part of the PDHPE program. I'm not even sure what that
subject needs to be abolished.
Personal development.
Health and physical education, I think it is.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's just take a little bit of time. This questionnaire says, what do you think caused your heterosexuality? This is to students now. To Year 8 students, we're talking, 12-year-olds. When and how did you decide...
Wouldn't it be great to indoctrinate kids, to send them prepared how to answer this biologically, scientifically?
When did you decide you were
accurately.
heterosexual? When did you decide that you were heterosexual, Dave? Did you make a conscious decision? These are the people that tell us that you can't decide whether you're gay or not. And yet they're telling... In fact, their political movement has just changed laws in Queensland and Victoria and the ACT to make it a crime to try and tell a gay kid that, if you asked questions like this to gay kids, you would be fined and criminalised under the laws that passed in these 3 states. Is it possible your heterosexuality is a phase you may grow out of? Now, if you said that to a gay kid, again, you'd be in breach of the new gay conversion therapy laws here in the state of Queensland. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. It goes on and on. If you should choose to nurture children, would you want them to be heterosexual knowing the problems they would face? What? The great majority of sexual predators are heterosexuals.
Well, now that's a statement that can be contested.
Well, do you really consider it safe to expose your children?
But the great majority of sexual predators are heterosexuals. The great majority of people
are heterosexuals.
I
mean, this is just laughable.
What are the odds? The great majority of drivers are heterosexuals.
Well, have a look.
Would you like?
You could get run over by a heterosexual driver.
You're going to get run over by heterosexuals more likely than a homosexual.
Look, we're not going to go through all of these, but question 11 is...
stupid, it's hurting.
How could the human race survive if everyone were heterosexual?
Probably
the human race would survive. And then it goes, considering the menace, menace of overpopulation. Now, this was straight out of...
That's about 1,000 years old,
This is unbelievable. And then question 12, there seem to be very few happy heterosexuals. We're obviously a very sad bunch.
We're miserable.
Techniques have been developed with which you might be able to change if you really want to. Again, the hypocrisy here is unbelievable. If you said to a young gay student, techniques have been developed that could allow you to change, or a transgender kid who perhaps is starting on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, you would be arrested for gay conversion therapy.
Lyle, I have one piece of advice for parents. Homeschool.
Go to a Christian school while it's still free to teach biological reality.
Get your kids out of school. Raise them yourself.
Mark Latham, what a champion. This man will not rest. Why is this happening under a so-called conservative, the Berejiklian Liberal National Government, John Barilaro, the National Party leader? Where are the people? I know there's Christians and there's strong Catholics. Where are these people who have got some sort of moral basis? Where are the people who believe in biological science speaking up on this?
I always bring it back to, it's my fault. It's my fault that we've got weak politicians. It's my fault we've got compromised conservatives. It's my fault that we've allowed politicians We've been understanding and gracious and conciliatory when they say to us, oh, we don't want to appear too radical like you. We've got to chase the votes in the centre, otherwise we just won't win. No, represent me.
Yeah.
You're my representative. Represent me.
Don't be too hard on yourself, but I know what you're saying.
I'm saying
all of us.
we have to take responsibility.
Well, we haven't, have we?
And
We've let this stuff slip through.
If you're not a member of a political party, this is your fault. It's your fault Gladys Berejiklian gets pre-selected for her seat. It's your fault your local member it's not about being mean. And if you feel like I'm being mean, maybe take a teaspoon of concrete and harden up. We have to take responsibility.
We have to participate in our democracy. This is the price of not participating.
If we don't take responsibility, we give the power away to any solution. And if you want other people to have the responsibility for the problems we find ourselves in, if you want to be powerless, then reject responsibility.
We have to find our
but
voices.
It's on us.
We have to demand that our politicians are accountable, that this sort of stuff is contested, and that we find our voice.
I think it's impossible. Smart, credible, intelligent people will disagree with me. So I stipulate, this is just my opinion, but I think it's impossible to start a new Conservative party, to start a new minor party.
Well, I've been there, done that.
We've had a crack
to prove it.
We've had a crack.
We've got to make the LNP work.
I think we've got to renew the major party on the right with an influx of rightly motivated, democratically participating members who demand their constitutionally entitled representation from their major party, the right to pre-select members, and if it takes 10 to 20 years, so be it. Don't have a short-term goal that frustrates success in even the medium term by you quitting when the short term doesn't work.
Well,
get in there and make a difference.
And because of things like this. Dave, our time is gone. There's two things I want to do before we finish. The first one is continue to remind viewers and listeners about my book, I Kid You Not, Notes from 20 Years in the Trenches of the Culture War, and perhaps we can flash that up on the screen. I'd really encourage you to get the book, and it's because I believe in the message, and I've had so much feedback from people who have read it, and they've told me how it's impacted them, how it's made them angry about the sort of things that Dave and I were just discussing. We started highlighting the gender fluid stuff when I was back at ACL about 5 years ago. Other groups did as well. The book is full of stories like this that will blow your mind about what politicians are getting away with because we're not participating, as you've said. So
that's right.
Please get the book. It'll inform you more. It'll help you understand what's going on behind the scenes. You can get it at lyleshelton.com.au. $35 includes postage and handling. It would make a great Christmas gift. Perhaps you've read the book. You might know someone who might benefit from reading this over the Christmas period when there's a bit of downtime. I'd encourage you to get that. Dave, as we leave the show, I wanted to show people this new pro-life video that I discovered on YouTube the other day. You've told me you've seen it many, many times. It's from a Canadian group.
Fantastic, yeah.
Choice 42, I think they're called. I looked them up. They have a lot of really... We've got to be creative about getting the message out about human rights for the unborn. And I'd like to leave our viewers and listeners with this clip. Many of you may have seen it as you have. Did you have some reflections on it, Dave, without...
Look, it's a great piece of media to underline the very profound but simple reduction of the entire abortion debate.
It's just a big truth bomb, isn't it?
Well, here's the two things. If you are pro-abortion to any degree, you are either anti-science, as this media so hilariously highlights. But if you're not anti-science and you recognise the humanity of the living human from conception, then you must be anti-human rights. Because it's never okay to kill a living human for anything other than the preservation of another person's life. Absolutely.
And look, you and I can discuss this intellectually and well as we're doing now, but it's one thing to produce a piece of really creative media that's funny, that's witty, that makes you laugh at just how ridiculous it is that we allow this travesty to happen. So as we go out today, please take a look at this. But from me and from Dave. Thank you for joining me this week on the Lyle Shelton Show.
Thank you for letting me rabbit on.
Mate, it's been great. It's been an absolute pleasure to rake over the coals of the US election and other things. Thanks very much for joining us, and please join us again next week on the Lyle Shelton Show.
Human rights. You may think you've always had yours, but you would be wrong. So how did you get your human rights? From the magical birth canal, of course. Disclaimer. Birth canal is not the size of an actual birth canal. Just saying. Before the baby or fetus is born, it is not a human being. Clearly. But as it passes through the birth canal, something amazing happens that transforms it into a person with human rights. Observe. Not a person, not a person, not a person. Coming out the other end, a person! Human rights! Congratulations. You now have value. Can't say the same for this one. So what exactly happens in the birth canal that causes this magical transformation? No one knows. But popular scientific theories include fairies, aliens, or of course, a mini Big Bang. I think it's fairies. No human rights? Human rights. No human rights? Human rights. Makes sense. Thanks, magical birth canal. Science, logic, magic, human rights.
What if it's a C-section?
The Lyle Shelton Show is a production of The Good Source, hosted by Lyle Shelton. To watch, listen to, or read more content without the SJW PC fact filter, visit goodsource.news. Good, SAUCE.news. Become a Good Source supporter for exclusive access to live and unedited interview recordings, including the conversations before and after the show.